So we have here our first panel focused on literature, obviously one of the possible perspectives to talk about people of the book. But now we are heading to a different theme, and we want to talk about the Tanach. The Tanach, or all of our books and our, sorry, I forgot the word in English.
Spanish?
Our holy books, thank you. So it's, yeah, holy. I just forgot the word holy. How holy. So obviously another way of understanding people of book. I will just give the floor to my colleague Sonja Viličić, who will introduce our panelists. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I will not introduce our panelists, but first we will do something else. Good afternoon. It's still siesta time, I know, I feel it. So you will get a little task, and you really have 1 minute to do the task. So you need to find a person that you didn't introduce yourself today. Wait. It's very easy, but it's not the end of the task. Then you need to stand up, sit closer to the center, starting from the first row, next to this person, and you need to discuss all this in 1 minute. Which female biblical character or story, it's coming up, you find problematic from a modern perspective. Okay? Just one. Which female biblical character or a story you find problematic for the modern times we live in. Okay? And when I say biblical, I mean Tanach, which is a Jewish or Hebrew Bible. But if it's not familiar for you, then you can go to other biblical stories of different religions. Okay? 1 minute is starting now. Find the person you didn't talk to, sit in the middle, starting from the middle, and try to find a biblical character or a story. So just throw me the names or the stories. What are the stories or the names? Sarah, Rebecca, Esther, Eve, Hagar. A lot of stories. Is there a story that is not problematic? I'm not sure. Let's ask these beautiful panelists. They will introduce themselves. They will also say why they think they are on this panel. And they will also share the most problematic, because a lot of them are problematic. So maybe Olga will start from you.
Me? Okay. So, my name is Olga, as you already know. We've met. I have honestly no idea. No, it's not that I don't have any idea why I'm on this panel, but I'm certainly not a big Tanach specialist. But I think that I'm a good example of what is called a cultural Jew, in that my entire outlook, my work in many years now, has been framed by the Jewish cultural narrative, which of course stems from the Tanach, without it influencing or determining my lifestyle, I suppose, or my personal choices. So I would guess this is what brings me to this panel. We had a little discussion here as to which characters we would bring up, and you starting with me is difficult because mine, I think, are among the more problematic. So I wanted to bring up the duality of Dina and Bathsheba. I think everybody knows these two stories, but in case anybody needs a reminder, Dina was the sister of the rarely mentioned sister of the of the 12 brothers, and she was involved in a story that is told entirely from the male perspective, in which she is treated basically as the property of her brothers. The actual story goes that a Shechemite, a man from Shechem, fell in love with her. Literally, it's one of the most beautiful expressions in the Tanach, because it says she found favor in his eyes and he spoke softly to her. Isn't that beautiful? Spoke softly to her. Cut to, very drastically, her brothers announcing that this man defiled her and wreaking havoc in his city. To cut a long story short, everybody dies because these guys announce that this man ruined their property of a woman, which is interesting because nobody ever asks Dina if she happens to also be in love with this guy or wants to marry him, because what he does is he kneels before the brothers and he begs to be allowed to marry her, but because he defiled her. Whereas the absolute polar opposite is the story of Bathsheba, who is happily, we hope, married to her husband Uriah, who is a general basically in King David's army, but King David abuses his position, sees Bathsheba being attractive and going about her business as a beautiful woman, basically, and thinks that entitles him to her body and, by extension, her entire life, and kills off her husband. And so that story is not presented to us as abuse. David does bear some consequences, but it is still presented to us as one of the conquests of our great king. Whereas Dina's story, which may or may not have just been a simple love story between a girl who was living in separation from her brothers and in close proximity to the Shechemite, but we will never know because he was killed. So.
Thank you.
Thanks for that depressing tidbit, Olga.
Thank you, Olga, very much, and for introducing these stories to us. Magda, why are you here? What do you think why you're here? And whom would you choose?
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lena Rubenfeld. I'm a co-director of FestivALT, which is a Jewish arts and activism organization working in Poland. And one of the mandates of our organization is looking critically at the current circumstances of, let's say, the condition of Polish Jewry, the communities in which we live in, and trying to, and the memory that surrounds us, and trying to sort of engage with them through art. And I guess that perhaps that quality of looking critically at things is something that we need when looking at biblical texts that are often held up high at pedestals and are given to us as as role models to follow. Although I also don't really identify as an expert in Tanach in any particular way, so hopefully this is going to be interesting for you. I guess maybe because of Purim still being fresh in my mind, when you asked that question, I thought of the story of Vashti in particular, and how when she is asked by her husband Ahasuerus to appear in front of his drunken friends because he wants to show her off as being so beautiful, she actually refuses him. And there's a big dynamic that's surrounding that scene, connected also to the fact that there are interpretations that say that Vashti is perhaps asked, because Ahasuerus asks her to wear her beautiful crown. But there are some interpretations that actually she's being asked to wear nothing but the crown. So in fact, he's asking her to appear in front of a room full of drunken men naked. And in fact, Ahasuerus is king because of Vashti. He is not coming from a royal family. She is the princess, and he becomes king by marrying into her family. He is a son of her father's stableman. So he's in fact somebody that he perceives to be of much lower status, and her husband and a man. And so she feels strong enough to defy him and to say no to him, for which she is punished, banished, and disappears from the story. Basically by refusing to fulfill his order. And even though there are some interpretations that see Vashti as like this kind of ultimate feminist, or the first feminist, the first woman who like is brave enough to stand up to the guy, in fact, we don't know what happens to her, and the assumption is she might be even killed as a result of her actions. So That's a story I find problematic. I don't know about you.
Thank you. Maybe I would just like to add that when I was a child and the book of Esther was so fascinating to me because, of course, that's one of the rare female characters that is mentioned and it has a book by its name. And then when you are growing up and you understand so many problematic things in that book, that Esther was chosen because she was beautiful. What does it mean for a child or teenage girl, a Jewish teenage girl, that, somebody names you after all this, plot, and that you were hiding your identity, but then you saved your people. Like, it's so confusing still today. So thank you for mentioning it. I'm just throwing that out as a person who is in Jewish education and in Jewish heritage. I think it's sometimes, if we really want to teach our texts, it's so hard because, of course, we want kids or students or older people to be connected to these stories, and we try to make them beautiful because they have beautiful parts, and we don't actually mention less beautiful parts. So let's just think about that. Rabbi Irene, welcome.
Hi, oi. I'm so used not to speaking on the microphone because at the synagogue I have to scream. I'll try not to scream and I'll try to speak as slowly as I can because I usually speak too fast, so I've been told. Well, I guess I'm here because apart from being a rabbi and being a woman, which is quite strange, so I've been told, although it's not that strange anymore, but in Spain certainly it is, because I still have comments like, oh, you're a rabbi, but you're a woman. And it was quite weird at the beginning at the community, but anyway, I want to believe that I'm not here just because I'm a woman and a rabbi, but because I'm currently writing a doctoral thesis precisely on very problematic pairs of women in the Tanach. And one of the pairs of women is Esther and Vashti, and that's actually the only chapter I have written. And another problematic pair of women are Sarah and Hagar, and Sarah is the one that I was thinking of, because if you remember, she treats very harshly Hagar when she's got a little kid, and she sees that, she gets very jealous because, which, to be honest, is quite human, right? You get jealous because a much younger woman that has had a baby boy with your husband who's very old and you're very old, she's very happy with the baby. So what do? You just cast her aside and tell her to go away and with nothing, right? So you expect her to die in the desert. And this is Sarah, one of our first matriarch. So I find that deeply problematic, just reading it for the first time and all the many times that I've had to read it and write about it and give a sermon about it. But now reading the Midrash and all the interpretations about Sarah and Hagar and why she does that, we can talk about it later, but you get lots of explanations on why she did that. Okay, she's not that bad. She did it because, and that's a rabbinical literature, which means that they realized that there was something deeply wrong in doing that. Therefore, we have to excuse that behavior. On the other hand, nowadays, we have loads of modern midrashim, which we can talk about later, excusing, showing how Hagar, because she's a victim of Sarah, Hagar is the right hero. And I've read things like, she's the one who has a voice, she's a true feminist, and things like that. So, and I was like, well, you don't really read differently from those, rabbinical excerpts that I've read about it, but you go to the other side, which is, the whole thing, as you can see, is fascinating. Read my thesis when I finish it. You'll find it even more fascinating.
Free promotion. Great, thank you very much. We can all agree also from the first task that there are some problematic things or interpretations or things in our traditional literature. And if I quote Dina from today, I think you said that This literature actually sets the cultural and moral framework of who we are as Jewish people. And I would also say that you tackle a little bit, Irene, you were speaking a little bit about the rabbis, and Talmud is really not helping, and I will read something afterwards from Talmud of who women are and what are their characteristics, etc., etc. But let's try to ignore all of that, but let's really sit with the pain. I think it's a little bit painful, at least for me, as somebody who is very connected to these texts, but I see how they play out even today. So maybe it's a little bit abstract question, but what do you recognize that we can see from Tanach how it's, how you say, how it spills out, I don't know, maybe how it affects our Jewish world today? Where do you see these things are happening still? Maybe it's a little bit abstract, I don't know. I
don't think it's abstract. I think it's an understandable question, but I would question the question. I would try and see where those things can actually be faced in a constructive way today. Because clearly there are many leftovers of the, overall patriarchal, misogynic culture from which our culture stems, but I would argue that our culture is not, don't stone me, not based on the Tanach. It is based on a tradition of interpreting the Tanach, in part precisely because we recognize and have recognized for centuries now the difficult, problematic, and challenging aspects of the Tanach, being a text that was either written or divinely granted in a time very different from ours. So what I would like to possibly explore is whether or not there exists today interpretive traditions or new Jewish traditions which help us live with the fact that our tradition stems from a supremely flawed, I would say, compendium of texts. And I believe that, yes, I believe that there are interpretations and they don't begin today. And there are directions that at least aim and strive to remedy the situation that we find ourselves in which peculiarly women insist on existing still. There are quite many in society. And yet our culture seems to be excluding them or, what's the word? Discriminating against them from its roots. And there are attempts being made to remedy this from a very early time. We have at in the National Library's collections a machzor written by a rabbi in, I think, the 14th century, where he purposely replaces some of the more problematic phrases to be inclusive of women. There's a prayer we all know and love, which is thank you, God, for not making me a woman. This 14th or 15th century rabbi takes the care to actually change that in this prayer book to thank you, God, for making me what you made me, which is remarkable. This is, even the phrasing itself is remarkable and extremely modern. And this is not isolated. I would argue that even though we only have the one 15th century prayer book written by a man, which is like that, it's significant more than beyond just one book. I think it stands for a deeper recognition, a deeper sort of internal struggle of our tradition to sort of improve on itself and to grow out of those, of the rather awful, I have to say, roots that were laid for it.
Thank you very much. You can also connect to what Olga said or start anew.
Yeah, I mean, I would build on that to say that it might be that this is actually one of the most vital skills, I think, today for our survival, is to be able to critically interpret reality and to disagree with some of the things we see and hear and read, because that's becoming increasingly difficult in a time of disinformation and fake information that's being distributed. And so that skill of being able to connect between the different sources and to be able to create new interpretations, to innovate the traditions, to disagree with them, and to try to find new paths, I think is something that we all as societies really could use more of. And at the same time, I sort of feel like even though those stories, you know, and their engagement with them are an incredible source of inspiration and intellectual activity, I think in some ways I have a question about whether they still work. I feel that, you know, rabbinic Judaism grew out of sort of them not working entirely and a need for a different kind of body of work and body of text, but the question is whether that interpretation is enough now. Do we need to think of the, I don't know, Judaism 3.0 that incorporates somehow these layers of text and interpretation, but really tries to kind of propel us a bit further as a civilization? Because I at least find myself increasingly lost in this world today. And I don't know, I mean, I find a lot of answers and a lot of inspiration for, I would say, some of the daily challenges in my personal leadership and some of the work that I'm doing. But as a community, as a society, I don't really find those answers anymore, or I struggle to find them.
Okay. So I have to say that every time I go back to the Torah and to Tanach, I try to approach it without any, you know, I don't want to read what the rabbi said about that text. Then I read interpretations. But at first, I just want to read the text. And I always find something that calls me to the moment I'm living in or the moment we are living in. That said, I don't think the text per se has to be patriarchal or anything. It's just a text reflecting the world they were living in. Whatever we do with that text is what turns it into a patriarchal text or a feminist text or whatever you want to call it. And that's what you were saying about the this interpretation that you find no meaning in the text itself, and in some of these interpretations, if I understood correctly, the rabbinical interpretations, I don't know, we should reinterpret those interpretations, but that's exactly what we're doing constantly. Every time we read it, we give a new interpretation. So this is it's a very simple lesson that I give to my bat mitzvah kids. I always say, this is your text. Now is your turn to say something about this text. How does it call, I mean, what does it tell you, what it is for you? And then you are reinterpreting for the next generations. So I had one boy who is obsessed with football and number 8 player of Football Club Barcelona. So he was reading about, curiously enough, his parasha was Shmini, which means the 8th day. And he was all obsessed with number 8. Everything is 8, right? So he interpreted that into his world, and he told the people who were there. So that's another interpretation. Maybe he's not a rabbi yet, but the text is for all of us, and and all the different layers we have as people, because as we grew up, we cover ourselves with a different layer, and that layer plus the other layers interact with the text, and we have something new to say. I have to say that because every year I have to reinterpret the text, right?
I totally agree with that, and I think that for me, if I can interject, like what I meant more is, I guess, because I think on a personal level they still work, and they still can be really like kind of pushing us forward and asking us to question things, but that jump from sort of having Tanach to going to Talmud, to going to like another layer of body of work, which changed really you kind of recognize that, you know, temple is no longer, and certain rituals cannot work. We need a new way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And so Talmud sort of wasn't the only reason, but it sort of grew out of like a need for a new system. Mm-hmm. And so I think that on a personal level, absolutely agree with you, and I, you know, love the fact that every generation needs to create their new interpretation. But I guess my question is there a possibility, or is this the right time now to try to think of the level after that?
It's a conversation.
So, I'm reading this book, preparing myself for Pesach, because, you know, have a community, they always have answers. No, never. They always have questions. Some of them say they have answers, but... and it says something very interesting about what you were saying, that this author, I don't remember the name, but he says that the Seder, Pesach Seder, was a first attempt to legitimize following tradition outside temple, and outside the temple, even in temple times. Because he argues that we've been trying to do that constantly, even when there was a temple. So that's exactly what we are doing. And I was talking to somebody else in this audience before, and I was saying, look, many young people don't find any meaning going to the synagogue. What are they doing? They create mosaica, or they create their own minyan, or they create like a Shabbat dinner and fun, and now they create, like, we talk about the Var Torah, but in a funny way, whatever. But they're trying to do things outside what is the new temple, and this is very radical, which is the synagogue, but they're trying to create a space outside that. So I think that we're doing that. We are constantly trying to do that. And yeah, we are in not the right way, but we are on the way of doing that, and we've been doing that for a long time.
If I may add, I think, first of all, I entirely agree with what you just said, but I think also this is sort of a determinant of us as a society that we even consider this an option, in that it's not a given to interpret a holy text. It's not a given to not take your canon literally. And it's not a given to create your own spaces. And there's a story I tell sometimes. We have at the National Library a collection of Agadot, Pesach Agadot, if we're speaking about Pesach. I think ours is the world's biggest and most diverse collection of Agadot. And we have a bunch of different Agadot from different times, including some really relatively modern ones, such as the Communist Agada or the Pioneer Agada, or the non-Agada Agada. And the interesting thing to me about those is not that people choose to, put their own texts in a book around Passover time. The interesting thing to me about that is that they still choose to name it the Agada. They still choose to be telling their story as part of this story, even if the only thing in common that this has with the Agada that we read usually at Passover is the name. Everything else is provocatively different, and yet they still choose to name it the Agada. So to me, this is rather unique to this culture that we're here to discuss, that we even believe that to be an option, and that we still, on the one hand, we give ourselves permission to come out of to just color outside the lines exclusively. Don't even look at the lines, just color outside. But also at the same time, we're constantly aware of the lines. We choose to be aware of them. We don't choose to step so far away that we can't see the lines anymore. And that's interesting to me. I don't know, I'm not qualifying it, other than this, I think, is a peculiarity of this culture. And it's interesting. I think maybe this allows for some space for, Judaism 3.0, as you called it, or 6.0, or whatever number we're up to.
But there is also, Lena, the fact that we have the responsa literature, which is very important. The fact that we have women rabbis, okay, all of these come from the responsa literature. In America, for example, talking about Pesach, we all put an orange on top of the Seder plate, okay, because one of the rabbis said, there's going to be an orange on the Seder plate if there's going to be a woman rabbi. So we do have an orange on the Seder plate. So it's important to acknowledge the fact that we have modern responsa by the conservative movement, the reform movement, where they're bringing up all sorts of questions that are modern questions. We have women answering some of those questions, something that you will not find in any place in the Talmud. So we're getting there. I think we're in the process, and we're seeing more and more kind of those things in the interpretation of the Torah and the interpretation of the Talmud, actually, because they're trying to change a lot of those things. The talitot that women wear, the kippot that women wear, putting tefillin and so forth. So all of this is part of this evolvement of the Talmud with the modern responsa.
Thank you very much for the inputs. Magda, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that. I'm wondering about the two things that were just said a second ago, because I think exactly what you said is also what Olga was talking about, which is sort of like, even if we're coloring outside of the lines, we're still sticking to the lines, right? So we're still referencing the Talmud, we're still referencing certain categories that exist, that we are familiar with, and we're moving within them. But I would challenge to say that actually a lot of people are not respecting the lines, they're not remembering the lines because they're simply assimilating out. That there's a lot of people who are not finding their places in the Jewish communities anymore and not creating innovative Jewish institutions. They're simply, moving away. Yeah. And that was also the story of the diaspora. And there was a school of rabbis. There was a small group of rabbis that decided to create the Talmud, and it so happened that their tradition continued, and we, thanks to them, continue until today. But there was the majority of Jews at the time when the temple was destroyed assimilated out and disappeared into the majority. So my question is whether we're, and I could be totally wrong with this, but what I'm trying to think about is the sort of the next option, the next step in which we can, and this is what has to happen in order for the next good option for all of us to be created. There has to be a ton of different attempts. There has to be different people trying different things, and ultimately one of them is going to work. And maybe there's multiple things that will work for us, because this is a day and age of things being dispersed and fragmented and working like that. But I'm wondering about those niches, those kind of fringes where things do not work and don't follow the lines anymore.
I would say, thank you all for all your inputs. We will definitely shorten the panel because you need to go, and we see that you are tired, but maybe, not but, maybe. I just want to say that for me the question is who is doing this work and why? Okay, so why we are sitting here, educators, rabbi, activists, and we are discussing this, why it's important for us, what we will create in the future, and who will read the creation, not just create in terms of writing, but the spaces that you mention. And it seems to me that these spaces always come from a personal need that becomes a collective need. And Dina, I'm very happy that you mentioned America. America is the model that Europe is looking towards. But if I talk about Serbia, we have one rabbi, two rabbis, Orthodox and Chabad, right? What is my space there? How do I create that space? And when I created, what kind of problems, what kind of confusion I create in my community? And do I have an energy always to be rejected? Right, so I think that there is a struggle, but I don't want to finish depressing. I think that the important is that we don't give up, and that we see people that are giving up because they feel they are not connected, to try to connect them in any way possible. It doesn't matter if it's a female or male or transgender or LGBT, whoever it is, a convert, like the Jewish literature about converts, also very problematic. So how do we change that actually with our behavior? Like for me, that's very important. And for the end, I will finish with a joke, so that we laugh a little bit. How do you call a wife of a male rabbi? What is the name of the wife of the male rabbi? Rabbanit, Rebetze. What is her role? First association. To cook.
To cook, yeah, to go with the women
to go to mikveh, to raise kids, visit the sick. Okay, now the tricky part comes. How you call, if the rabbi is straight, how do you call a husband of a woman rabbi?
I would like to know
that how would you call a husband of a woman rabbi? John, rabbi's husband, doctor. Okay, think about it, because many female rabbis will have husbands, and I'm not sure they will give birth to kids and they will take care of sick, and so just think about it in the context that we just spoke about.
May I say something about that?
Yes, Rabbi, you can say anything.
Well, thank you. Can I go to your community? So, at the beginning, when I went to the community and I went with my husband, they said, "So what do we call you?" And I said, "You call him," and I said his name. And they were like, "Okay, so is there no name?" But I said the name because I didn't want him to have a role because he was my husband. I said he is he, and he has his role, his job, his whatever, and I don't want him to be anyone's husband. That's it. So
I think it's beautiful. Yeah. Let's hope that Rebbetzin will also have her name and her life. Let's put it that way. Of course, this was not about all the discussion was not about provoking anything or challenging. Yes. But not provoking and being angry on some parts of our tradition, even though there is a lot of anger. But it was more about what you can do in your communities regarding this topic. Again, we didn't choose, we are all experts, but on a very different levels, I would say. But we didn't choose academic things, which was stories that come personally from our hearts, and I'm pretty sure you can do it also in your communities. So good luck with that, and I hope that I didn't insult anyone, because that was not attention.
5 minutes, if somebody wants to do a question to the panel. Yes, Jeff, thank you. You're always with a good question for us. Thank you.
Just to keep the upbeat, positive spin, you know, I think a lot of people are looking for approval from a system that wasn't so great. I mean, we romanticized the past of synagogues and involvement, and, you know, Jewish knowledge wasn't so great, at least from an American perspective, in the 40s and 50s. So I look to limud and these wonderful new opportunities as really so exciting, because you can always wallow in the past and say, well, oh, it was always better, but I see so many interesting, exciting things in the Jewish community. Yeah.
I completely agree. We have a very passionate limudnik here that runs half of the limud around Europe. I agree, but I will also give an argument. Limud happens over a week. Right? Our life happens 360 days besides limud. We get inspired by limud and everything what is happening there. The question is how many allies we have back home so that we can create things, and we can create access to these texts to more people that are not, we didn't tackle that, but again, we come from different communities, like who can study Torah in our communities?
Just to give an example, in Porto, we brought a rabbi from Madeira who was a convert or Jew by choice, a black American woman who was a lesbian. And
Mazal tov.
Yeah, and she was extremely knowledgeable of, and she related to our community. And we weren't looking for the Orthodox rabbi to give us approval, we just did it. Yeah.
Maybe
congratulations for that. Yeah. So you need a little chutzpah, and I agree.
Just a little maybe. Hello? Just a commentary on that, because we actually just had a training for Limud volunteers, Limud European volunteers in Warsaw that finished 2 days ago. And one of the things that I took out of it is we were talking a lot about how we often get sort of boggled down in the product, in the like, let's create the event, let's create Limud, let's create European Day of Jewish Culture, let's create something, but we sort of forget about the bigger picture, about why we're doing that. And it's very good to kind of think about that, you know, we're creating Limud, for example, because we want to create a platform for the broader community to be able to come together, to be able to nurture the next generation of leaders, for example, to increase Jewish literacy in our community. And I think that for you as events organizers, I encourage you to keep in mind that bigger picture for which you're creating your events, in order to sort of, then the event becomes just a stepping stone into that bigger vision. So that's maybe where I would end. Yeah.
I'd like to add a word to that. I think in general, Limud is an excellent example of something that's now rapidly growing, and I'm a big fan of Limud, growing an old-fashioned way of queering the space, if you allow me the expression. Because in the broadest possible sense, because we take this space of Jewish culture, of Jewish learning, we make it our own, we don't ask anybody's permission, and I think that is sort of an example that works, which by existing gives us permission to continue doing that, seeing as, nobody owns those spaces. Nobody can tell us what to do. We can go out and do a European Day of Jewish Culture the way that we want, and we can continue querying that space, because by now, Limud space is already a space that is sort of mainstream. We can take it further. We're allowed. Nobody owns the space, and nobody can tell us otherwise. I think your example of Limud is a great example of how empowering this permission can be.
Can I just say something very short?
This is a never-ending panel.
No, sorry, is what you were saying about getting approval from the Orthodox rabbi. It might sound like a joke, or we might laugh at that, but it has a lot to do with authenticity. And this is something I've come across when I was studying to become a rabbi, and I think that as communities we're coming across this question of authenticity. So just a very short anecdote. I had been a rabbi in my community for 1.5 years, and all of a sudden the former rabbi came to visit. And the former rabbi looks like your regular rabbi, right? You might think of a rabbi, beard, certain age, handsome, whatever. And one of the members of my congregation, he said, "Oh, here comes a real rabbi." Right? It was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. This happened, and I was like, "Oh yeah!" So I will stop shaving and I'll start eating a lot, so I really look like a true rabbi. And they were like, "Oh my God," right? So this authenticity, which it sounds ridiculous, and we laugh about that, but I've been approached and asked many questions such as, what do you think about modesty? Why do you wear trousers? Things like that. Do you think you can be a woman rabbi? What about modesty? And what we don't realize that all that tradition of Talmud and Midrash and all the literature that we have, we follow certain patterns today because of what has been said on those books, right? And we carry on with that. So to put an example, Viličić Rabbah, a Midrash, it says, why do women have to be modest? Because, according to Bereshit, 2nd chapter, they came out of a bone from the man. So the bone was inside the man, therefore it was covered. So women have to cover themselves and have to be modest. And out of that, you get the whole tradition where a woman in a panel, not this one, somewhere else, asked me, "What about your modesty?" And I was like, "Excuse me?" So, it depends on the background, on the social background, geographical background, on the temporary background, etc., etc. I bet women in Roman times and men in Roman times, male Jews, didn't dress the way they dress today, but they had their, probably they didn't even wear pants. So, and they were like, "Oh, I never thought about that." So context in that case was very important, and the background and the social, geographical, and temporary background. And I think we have to get that into account, and that's part of our tradition, and we have to get to know the tradition, and we have to get to know these texts precisely to tackle everything that has come out of these texts, such as this. I just wanted to say it. I needed to say it.
Thank you very much. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful ending. We have one more question, Robin, yeah?
If there's time, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm really I'm activated in terms of whatever explicit misogyny and all the unconscious bias too that we have to face, and certainly biblical stories is part of the shaping of these paradigms. And it makes me wonder if we ask the question differently, if we would get different answers. So. For example, which female biblical character story do you find empowering from a modern perspective? How might that change the way we might look at things? Or which male biblical character or story do you find problematic? And I wonder, do we look at that? Do we ask that, or it's just the norm? You know, so it's just, what kind of biases can we confront in the way we also pose or turn the questions around? And I just, there's maybe not an answer now, but it's just the reflections that I'm left with going out, because I think these questions are huge opportunities for, besides personal reflection, but also intra-group reflection and intergroup reflection or broader societal concerns, because this is part of also the founding paradigm for Europe more generally too, you know? So I just wanted to put that out there because I was left from this conversation.
Thank you very much. I mean, Robin works for an organization called CEJH, and there is a lot of bias and everything that she mentioned inside, she's dealing with it. So thank you, because I think it's very, very important what you mentioned. Yes, of course, this question brings a lot of anger. It can be interpreted in many ways. But what if we pose it differently? What men will come up? The men that, suffered, or the men that were heroes, or the men that did something wrong? So there are many, many options how we can do it. Thank you for mentioning it. We have to end this panel. Thank you very much for bearing it with us. Thank you to the panelists. And good luck, everyone. Take care of your women and everyone else, of course.